Welcome back to Outlaw Operations. Tonight, we're diving into a chilling case filled with deception, greed, and betrayal. A story that seemed to be about love and ambition but ended in tragedy. Before we get into it, take a second to drop a comment. Where are you listening from? And if you enjoy true crime storytelling, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's settle in and get started. The night was eerily silent when investigators arrived at the apartment, a sense of unease settling over them as they pushed open the door. What had once been left unlocked was now mysteriously bolted from the inside. Something wasn't right. Inside, the dimly lit room revealed a chilling sight. Attila Ban lay sprawled on the bed, intoxicated, his body marred with self-inflicted wounds from a knife and a pair of scissors. His dazed and incoherent state made questioning difficult. Instead of speaking, he gestured wildly, his erratic movements adding to the unsettling atmosphere. With little choice, authorities transported him to the hospital for medical attention. But what investigators didn't yet know was that Attila had orchestrated a sinister hiding place within the very furniture of the room. Beneath the sofa bed, concealed within its base, lay the lifeless body of Tibor Vass. Attila had carved a slit in the bed's base, stockpiled a phone and several bottles of water, and climbed inside. From this secret vantage point, he had been watching. Listening. Hidden in plain sight, he had evaded the police, the pathologist's examination, and even the forensic team's scrutiny. It wasn't until later that authorities pieced together the sequence of events that led to this horrifying discovery. Attila Ban was arrested at the hospital, and on July 9, 2012, his trial began. What emerged in the courtroom painted a picture of obsession, jealousy, and a night that spiraled into unthinkable violence. The gathering had started as a celebration, a party among friends. But as the evening wore on, the atmosphere darkened. Attila harbored deep resentment towards Tibor, stemming from long-standing jealousy. His bitterness had boiled over at a previous team-building event when he had thrown a tantrum over a group photo that included Tibor but not himself. The tension escalated further when Attila learned that Tibor had been accepted into a prestigious university program in Hungary and would soon leave the UK. The final straw came that night when Attila saw Tibor and Alice kissing. Rage overtook him, consuming any rational thought. What happened next was a blur of violence and bloodshed. Attila claimed he had no recollection of the brutal acts he committed, only that he awoke the next morning to find his two friends lifeless. Overcome with guilt but too afraid to end his own life, he instead devised his elaborate hiding scheme. Prosecutor Richard Whittam detailed the gruesome findings in court. Attila was discovered naked on a single bed, his body bearing injuries to his wrists, forearms, and neck. Investigators were stunned to learn that he had managed to remain undetected even after the crime scene had been meticulously examined. When questioned about this, Detective Inspector John Finch defended the oversight, explaining that lifting every piece of furniture in search of a person was not standard protocol. Doing so could risk disturbing critical forensic evidence. As the trial unfolded, Rosalia Vass, Tibor's devastated mother, delivered a heart-wrenching tribute to her son. She described Tibor as an ambitious, talented young man who had a deep love for music, art, and photography. With his first paycheck, he had invested in a professional camera, eager to capture the beauty of the world through his lens. Rosalia spoke of the pain that would forever haunt her family, recalling the moment she received the unthinkable news: her 20-year-old son and his friend Alice had been murdered. The betrayal cut even deeper when she learned that the perpetrator was someone Tibor had trusted, someone who had once vowed to keep him safe. On July 18, 2012, after just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty. A month later, on August 17, Attila Ban was sentenced to 2 life terms. He would have to serve a minimum of 26 years before being eligible for parole. Justice had been served, but for the families left behind, the wounds would never truly heal. Welcome back, detectives. Tonight, we turn the page to another haunting case, the tragic story of Carol Nicole Malti. Born on September 19, 1995, in a small Italian province, Carol's life began with promise. The daughter of Fabio and Josephine, she was a bright and sociable child with a passion for learning. When her parents divorced, she remained with her mother, who worked tirelessly to provide her with a good education and a future filled with opportunities. Carol flourished into a talented young woman, fluent in 3 languages and well-traveled across Europe. She was an avid reader, a dancer, and a sports enthusiast. With a natural charm and keen intellect, she easily captivated those around her. As she entered adulthood, Carol's ambitions led her to pursue industrial design, arts, and fashion at a prestigious technical university. But fate had other plans. During her freshman year, she found herself facing an unexpected challenge: she was pregnant. The father, a fellow student studying architecture and design, was as unprepared for parenthood as she was. Yet, Carol made a brave choice: she would keep the baby. At just 20 years old, Carol gave birth to a son in 2016. Motherhood changed everything. She had to make sacrifices, leaving her studies behind to secure a stable future for herself and her child. Seeking better opportunities, she moved to Verona and found work as a sales consultant in a cosmetics and perfume retail chain. But beneath the surface of her seemingly ordinary life, a sinister fate awaited her. Carol's life had always been a series of twists and turns, but nothing could have prepared her for the dark path that lay ahead. It all started in 2019. She was in a long-term relationship, raising her 1-year-old son while her boyfriend worked from home, juggling projects and fatherhood. To the outside world, they seemed like a stable, happy couple. But beneath the surface, Carol was restless. She longed for passion, excitement, something her relationship no longer provided. Then she met Angelo. What began as stolen glances turned into secret rendezvous in dimly lit hotel rooms. The affair burned bright and fast, lasting 6 months before the inevitable happened: her boyfriend discovered her betrayal. The confrontation was explosive, and their relationship came to an abrupt, bitter end. Yet, Carol saw this as an opportunity, believing it was fate pushing her toward a new beginning with Angelo. But their love story wasn't a fairy tale. Angelo still lived with his parents, and they had strict rules. Carol, a mother herself, couldn't simply move in with her child from a previous relationship. Financially strained and with no alternative, she made the heartbreaking decision to leave her 4-year-old son with his biological father while she sought stability. She moved into Angelo's family home, relying on his parents' reluctant generosity. As if life hadn't tested her enough, fate struck again. Her mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's, a cruel disease that required costly treatments. Desperate for money, Carol scoured the internet for ways to earn an income from home. That's when she stumbled upon the world of social media. She created a YouTube channel, sharing intimate glimpses of her life in isolation. Though her content didn't gain much traction, her striking appearance didn't go unnoticed. Strangers flooded her comments section with both admiration and unsolicited, often inappropriate, suggestions. One viewer proposed an idea that stuck with her: OnlyFans. At first, the idea seemed outrageous. But the promise of financial independence was tempting. Under the alias Charlotte Angel, she dipped her toes into the world of adult content, starting with modest photos and videos. The response was overwhelming. Money poured in faster than she had ever imagined. With each passing month, her content became bolder, her following larger, and her financial worries a thing of the past. But secrets have a way of surfacing. 6 months in, someone from her past stumbled upon her account. Whispers turned into gossip, and soon, her double life was exposed. She tried to explain. She saw her work as art, a path to financial stability, but the damage was done. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with her. Even Angelo's parents, already skeptical of her presence, turned their backs on her. Then, the final blow: Angelo found out. He had believed she was working remotely as a designer, but the truth shattered his trust. He felt betrayed, torn between his love for her and the pressure from his family, who demanded he cut ties with her to protect their reputation. Ultimately, he chose them over her. By then, Carol had carved her own path. She was making more money than ever, attracting the attention of professional adult film directors. Studios reached out with offers she couldn't refuse. She was no longer just an online persona, she was becoming a star. Her name was whispered in industry circles, and fame, for better or worse, was knocking at her door. Despite her success, the weight of judgment pressed on her. The disapproval of society, the whispers behind her back, it all took a toll. But she held her head high, defending her choices, determined to prove that no one had the right to dictate how she lived her life. At 25, she sought a fresh start. She moved to Rescaldina, a quiet town in Milan, hoping to leave behind the stigma of her past. She took a job as a sales consultant at a perfume shop, convincing herself she could walk away from the industry for good. Then she met David Fontana. David was everything she wasn't looking for, older, married, and a banker by trade. But he had a passion for photography, particularly nude photography, and he saw Carol as his perfect muse. Their connection was instant, electric. Despite his marriage, David pursued her relentlessly. Their encounters were intoxicating, blending art, passion, and forbidden desire. He was fascinated by her past, by the allure she carried, and soon, he encouraged her to return to the adult industry. Carol hesitated at first, but David was persuasive. He believed in her talent, her ability to captivate audiences. By March 2021, David had left his wife. He moved in with Carol, fully immersing himself in her world. Together, they created content for her OnlyFans, their relationship blurring the lines between business and pleasure. He wasn't just her lover, he was her manager, her director, her biggest admirer. But with admiration came obsession. David was a jealous man. He loved seeing Carol in the spotlight, but he despised the attention she received from others. In public, he simmered with quiet rage whenever someone looked at her too long. Yet, he never stopped her from working. After all, her success benefited them both. But Carol didn't know that obsession can be a dangerous thing. And sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones we should fear the most.
Angelo had always been haunted by the past he shared with Carol. When he reached out to her, his voice trembled with regret. He confessed how much he had missed her, how he longed for another chance, promising that this time, he would accept her profession without judgment and never try to clip her wings. Carol, ever gracious, acknowledged his effort but gently revealed that she had already moved on. Another man had entered her life. Yet, despite this revelation, they continued to talk, bound by a complicated history that neither could fully sever. But love is never simple, and jealousy is a beast that festers in the dark. When David, Carol's new partner, discovered that she was still in contact with Angelo, his temper flared. Anger turned to obsession, and soon, to destruction. One night, in a fit of rage, David set Angelo's car ablaze, watching the flames consume it like a ritual of severance. The message was clear: stay away. Fearful for his safety, Angelo reported the crime, prompting the police to intervene. A restraining order was issued against David, but the fire left no concrete evidence linking him to the act. It was a warning, and Carol knew it. As Carol's career flourished, she found herself traveling frequently for film projects, her presence in the industry growing. The more fame she garnered, the more determined she became to secure a stable future for herself and her son. She had started saving for a home, a sanctuary where she could eventually step away from the industry and devote herself to motherhood. To accelerate this goal, she began producing exclusive custom videos, personalized fantasies for high-paying clients. The venture was lucrative, and Carol thrived. Even after their breakup, Carol and David continued working together, bound by contracts and an industry that rarely let go. But everything changed in September 2021 when Carol met Salvatore Galdo on a film set. There was an instant connection, one that deepened quickly. Unlike past relationships, this time Carol and Salvatore moved cautiously. They took the time to truly understand each other, mindful of the scars they both carried. Their love grew in quiet moments, away from prying eyes, until they made a decision that felt right: they would marry. But even as they planned a future together, Carol's life took a darker turn. In the months that followed, Carol's online presence became sparse. Her once active social media accounts turned ghostly, with only the occasional post surfacing, a glimpse of a seaside vacation here, a cryptic caption there. Then, silence. On March 20, 2022, a passerby walking along a remote cliff near Italian Borno made a gruesome discovery. Large black garbage bags were scattered down the slope, partially submerged near the water's edge. Something about them felt off, too heavy, too ominous. Driven by curiosity, the man moved closer, reaching for one of the torn bags. What he saw would haunt him forever. Through the rip in the plastic, human fingers protruded, stiff and pale. Panic-stricken, he called the police. When authorities arrived, they uncovered 4 separate bags, each containing dismembered body parts. The remains had been divided into 18 pieces. The state of the body made identification nearly impossible. The victim had been deceased for at least 2 months, and the cause of death was undetermined. What was clear, however, was that she had been frozen before being dumped, an attempt to delay decomposition and evade discovery. But nature had other plans. The impact of the fall had torn the bags open, exposing the terrible truth. Whoever had done this had gone to horrifying lengths to erase the victim's identity. Tattoos had been burned off with acid and cut away with precision. Still, forensic experts were able to reconstruct fragments of inked skin, running them through missing persons databases. A breakthrough came when the case made the news. A woman from the adult film industry stepped forward, identifying the disfigured tattoos as belonging to a colleague known as Charlotte. But Charlotte was just a stage name. Her real name was Carol. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. Authorities traced her last known interactions and soon discovered that she had been engaged to Salvatore Galdo. Strangely, despite her prolonged disappearance, Salvatore had never reported her missing. When questioned, he appeared genuinely shattered by the news, unable to comprehend how he had become a suspect. He insisted that he had remained in contact with Carol via text messages and social media. He even provided evidence, screenshots of their conversations. According to him, Carol had fallen ill and was self-isolating, which explained why he had not visited her in person. When pressed on why he never made a wellness check, he hesitated before naming someone else. David Fontana. David, he claimed, had assured him that he was taking care of Carol. This new lead sent the police down a different path. But before they could track David down, something unexpected happened. David walked into the police station himself, to report a missing person. He had no idea that Carol's body had already been found. The timing was suspicious. Why would he choose now to come forward? Investigators quickly realized that David had likely panicked upon hearing Salvatore's name in connection with the case. He knew that once the police began to dig, they would inevitably find him. And so, the real hunt began. David sat in the cold, sterile interrogation room, his hands trembling as he struggled to maintain composure. His eyes darted around, avoiding direct contact with the detectives, who could sense his discomfort. At first, his responses were measured but inconsistent, his nervous energy betraying him. He claimed that he and Carol had been close, but he hesitated when asked why they hadn't seen each other for months. The more they pressed, the shakier his answers became. For hours, the detectives played a psychological game of chess, dissecting every contradiction in David's story. The weight of the lies, the relentless questioning, it all became too much. And then, he broke. His voice cracked as he mumbled the chilling words, "It was an accident. I never meant to kill her." According to David, it all started in early January, during what was supposed to be just another filming session. A mysterious client had paid him a significant sum for a disturbing scene, one in which Carol would be bound, gagged, and subjected to simulated torture. The script called for David to place a bag over her head, tie her hands, and use various tools to make it look as though she was enduring unspeakable pain. It was all an act, or at least, that was the plan. David insisted that Carol had agreed to the terms, that she had known her limits, that he had promised not to hit her too hard. But something went horribly wrong. The hammer in his hand came down harder than intended. The sickening crack of bone beneath his grip shattered the illusion of control. When he ripped the bag from her face, he saw the truth. She was slipping away, her body convulsing, blood pooling beneath her. Panic overtook him, and instead of calling for help, instead of trying to save her, he made a terrible choice. One final blow to end her suffering. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered the sinister truth behind David's confession. The so-called mystery client never existed. It had been David all along. A twisted scheme meticulously planned under a web of deception. Carol had wanted to leave him, and he couldn't accept it. Fueled by rejection, he crafted a false identity, lured her in with an irresistible job offer, and set the stage for a brutal act of revenge. At approximately 9 p.m. on January 11th, he carried out his plan. The next day, he made calculated moves to cover his tracks, purchasing a large freezer with Carol's credit card, along with a saw and an axe. Over the course of several days, he dismembered her body with methodical precision, stripping away identifying features, burning and shredding what remained. Each cut, each strike, was an attempt to erase her existence. For 2 months, her remains sat frozen in a secret tomb of his own making. But David wasn't just hiding her body, he was hiding the truth. He assumed her identity online, responding to messages, posting updates, crafting a cruel illusion that Carol was still alive. Her friends, her family, even her fiancé, believed she had simply withdrawn due to illness. No one suspected that the person behind the screen was the man who had taken her life. By the end of March, David felt confident enough to dispose of what was left. He chose a remote cliffside, believing nature would complete the erasure of his crime. But fate had other plans. Just 2 days later, hikers stumbled upon the grisly remains. The investigation moved swiftly, and within a week, detectives had traced the crime right back to him. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the case was how long it had taken for anyone to notice Carol was missing. Not a single missing persons report had been filed. The digital facade David created was so convincing that even those closest to her never suspected the horrifying truth. Had someone sounded the alarm sooner, had her phone signal been traced earlier, David's secret might have unraveled far more quickly. At trial, David wept, insisting he had loved Carol, that her death had been an unintentional tragedy. He claimed he had planned to take his own life in remorse but never found the courage. The defense attempted to frame the incident as an accident, a moment of recklessness rather than premeditated murder. But the jury saw through the lies. On June 12, 2023, David was found guilty of manslaughter. The court sentenced him to 30 years in prison and ordered him to pay €350,000 in compensation to Carol's son, mother, and the father of her child. Strangely, the court did not deem the dismemberment of her body to be an aggravating factor. As a result, David could be eligible for parole in the future. This case serves as a haunting reminder that sometimes, the most terrifying monsters are the ones who hide in plain sight. Welcome back, detectives. Now, let's dive into another chilling case, the story of Catherine Wellsberg. Born in 1989 in the United Kingdom to loving parents Phil and Jane, Catherine had a bright future ahead of her. With an older sister named Lynn, she grew up in a warm household filled with laughter and ambition. In the summer of 2010, her life took a fateful turn when she met Rafał Nowak, a 31-year-old co-worker, while working a summer job. Rafał, a Polish immigrant, had come to England years earlier in search of a better life. He had a past, a previous marriage and a son he rarely spoke about. But to Catherine, he was charming, caring, and ambitious. Their relationship blossomed, starting with simple lunch breaks at work and quickly progressing to romantic dinners and long walks. Raffle won over Catherine's family, earning their trust and admiration. Her parents hoped for their happiness, and soon, wedding plans were in motion. Catherine, an ambitious young woman, graduated with honors in 2011 and secured a promising career as a business analyst. Her intelligence and kindness made her a beloved figure among her colleagues. She was a rising star, someone who had it all: love, success, and a bright future. With Raffle by her side, they bought a home together, a beautiful place in Willow Way. They were financially secure, insured, and deeply in love. Or so it seemed. But on September 12, 2012, everything changed. That night, as a local resident named Orlando drove through town, he stumbled upon a scene so disturbing that it would alter the course of this investigation forever. Angelo had reached out to Carol, telling her how much he missed her. He wanted to make things right, promising to accept her profession and never again try to control her freedom. His words were sincere, and Carol appreciated the effort, but her heart had already moved on. She had met someone new. Even so, she and Angelo remained in contact, their conversations lingering in the gray space between closure and unresolved feelings. But when David, her new partner, discovered this, his jealousy erupted into rage. He threatened Angelo, and in a violent act of retribution, set his car ablaze. It was the final breaking point. Carol cut ties with David, and Angelo went to the police. A restraining order was issued against David, but with no concrete evidence linking him to the fire, the case stalled. As time passed, Carol's career flourished. She traveled frequently for filming, gaining a massive following. But fame wasn't her end goal. She was working towards something bigger. She wanted to build a stable life for her son, save up, and leave the adult film industry behind. To accelerate this, she started offering custom video content, fulfilling fan requests for a hefty price. The strategy worked. Her income soared. Despite their romantic fallout, Carol and David continued working together professionally, keeping their personal lives separate, or at least trying to. Then, in September 2021, during a film shoot, Carol met Salvatore Galdo, a charismatic co-star. A connection sparked, deepening into something neither of them expected. They took their time, making sure they were truly ready before deciding to marry. This time, Carol was cautious. She had learned from her past. They kept their relationship private, protecting what they were building together. As the months passed, Carol's online presence dwindled. Her posts became infrequent, her once engaging personality now distant. Her last known vacation photos suggested she had recently visited the seaside, but she hadn't shared any details with her followers. Something had changed. Then, on March 20, 2022, in a remote area near Borno, Italy, a passerby stumbled upon something gruesome. While walking near a cliff, he noticed several large black garbage bags dumped on the rocky slope beside a body of water. The sight of trash in such a scenic location irritated him, so he decided to clean up. But as he lifted one of the bags, he felt its unnatural weight. Then, horror struck. The plastic had torn slightly, and through the rip, human fingers protruded. The man recoiled in shock before scrambling to call the authorities. When the police arrived, they discovered 4 garbage bags, each containing parts of a human body, cut into 18 pieces. The remains were so severely disfigured that identification seemed impossible. Forensic analysis determined that the victim was a young woman who had been dead for at least 2 months. The cause of death? Unknown. But what was certain was that her body had been stored in a freezer before being discarded, an attempt to delay discovery for as long as possible. Upon impact, some of the bags had torn open, scattering their gruesome contents. The perpetrator had tried to erase the victim's identity, burning and cutting away any defining features, even using acid to destroy tattoos. But despite the extreme damage, forensic experts managed to reconstruct enough of the tattoos to enter them into a missing persons database. Then came the breakthrough. A woman from the adult film industry saw the news and recognized the markings. The victim had once gone by the name Charlotte in their circle, but her real name was unknown. This information led investigators down a trail that ultimately revealed the truth. Charlotte was, in fact, Carol. With her identity confirmed, the next logical question was, who would want her dead? Suspicion immediately fell on her fiancé, Salvatore Galdo. After all, Carol had disappeared just months after their engagement. But strangely, Salvatore had never reported her missing. When questioned, his reaction was not what the police expected. He was devastated, genuinely shattered by the news. If he was guilty, he was putting on a hell of a performance. Salvatore insisted that he had been in regular contact with Carol via messaging apps and social media. He even provided evidence, screenshots of their conversations. According to him, Carol had fallen ill and was self-isolating. That was why he hadn't seen her in person. But then came the most suspicious detail. When asked why he hadn't checked on her, he revealed that David Fontana, the same David who had once torched Angelo's car, had assured him that she was being cared for. With this revelation, the investigation took a sharp turn. David was no longer just a name in the background. Before police could track him down, David made a shocking move. He walked into the station and filed a missing person report for Carol. He had no idea the body had already been found. David hadn't been keeping up with the news. He had dumped the evidence, assuming it would stay hidden for much longer. But once he heard Salvatore had been arrested, panic set in. He knew their phone records would expose him. The lie he had told about caring for Carol would unravel. And now, the police had their next suspect in the murder of Carol Fontana. Interrogators watched as David shifted in his seat, his fingers twitching, his breath uneven. His story was riddled with inconsistencies, each contradiction pulling the noose tighter around him. He claimed he and Carol had been close, yet admitted they hadn't seen each other in months. He insisted she had suddenly stopped contacting him, but under the relentless scrutiny of law enforcement, his carefully woven lies began to unravel. Hours passed, the room thick with tension, until David finally broke. His voice trembled as he confessed, a chilling revelation spilling from his lips. He had killed Carol. According to David, it was a tragic accident. It happened in early January during a filming session, one that had been requested by a mysterious client willing to pay a hefty sum. The script dictated that Carol would be tied, gagged, a bag placed over her head, subjected to brutal torture. A hammer. Various tools. A staged act of agony. She was to scream, to writhe in pain, to make it real. They had agreed upon the boundaries. David was not to hit her too hard. But then, a single miscalculated blow changed everything. The hammer came down, fracturing her skull. Panicked, he tore the bag from her head. The sight was unbearable, her life hanging by a thread. Instead of calling for help, instead of even trying to save her, David made a decision that would seal his fate. He raised the hammer once more and delivered the final, fatal strike. But investigators soon uncovered the truth that shattered his so-called accident. The mystery client had never existed. The request, the payment, the entire scenario, it had all been fabricated. The client was none other than David himself. He had lured Carol under false pretenses, orchestrating a sinister revenge plot. Carol had wanted to leave him. That, he could not allow. On the night of January 11th, at approximately 9 p.m., David carried out his true plan. The next day, using Carol's credit card, he purchased a large freezer. He then visited a hardware store, buying a saw and an axe. What followed was the unthinkable. He methodically dismembered her body, piece by piece, attempting to erase every trace of her existence. But dismemberment alone wasn't enough. David sought to obliterate her identity. He removed her tattoos, stripped her skin, burned and shredded what he could. What remained, he packed into plastic bags and stored in the freezer. For over 2 months, Carol's remains sat in the cold, hidden away while David meticulously maintained the illusion of her presence. To her friends and family, Carol was alive. David made sure of it. He took control of her phone, her social media accounts, crafting responses, sending messages. To them, she was simply busy, unwell, distant, but alive. Even her fiancé believed she was merely avoiding him, never suspecting the grim reality. No missing person report was filed. No alarm was raised. If only someone had questioned the silence sooner, authorities could have traced Carol's phone, a device David had foolishly kept with him the entire time. By late March, David felt confident enough to dispose of the body. He drove to a remote cliffside, believing the elements would take care of the rest. Whether her remains would rot away or be lost forever, he didn't care. He only hoped she would never be found. But fate had other plans. Carol's remains were discovered just 2 days later. Investigators worked swiftly, tracing every clue back to David. Within a week, he was in custody. Yet the most disturbing question remained: how had no one noticed she was missing for nearly 3 months? How had David so successfully manipulated reality that no one came looking for her? During the trial, David wept. He claimed he had loved Carol. That it had been an accident. That he had planned to take his own life, unable to live with what he had done. But the jury saw through his deception. On June 12, 2023, David was found guilty of manslaughter. The court sentenced him to 30 years in prison, ordering him to pay compensation amounting to €350,000 to Carol's son, mother, and the father of her child. Despite the gruesome nature of his crime, the court did not deem the manner of the killing as cruel, nor did it consider the dismemberment an aggravating factor. Because of this, David may one day walk free on parole. A chilling reality, one that leaves us all wondering just how far someone will go to silence the past. Welcome back, detectives. Tonight, we unravel another harrowing tale, one that begins with love, ambition, and promise but ends in an unthinkable tragedy. This is the case of Catherine Wellsberg. Born in 1989 in the United Kingdom, Catherine was the pride and joy of her parents, Phil and Jane Wellsberg. She shared a close bond with her older sister, Lynn, and led a bright and promising life. The summer of 2010 changed everything when she met Rafał Nowak, a 31-year-old co-worker with a past he rarely spoke of. Rafał, an immigrant from Poland, had come to England years earlier, seeking a better future. His previous marriage had ended, leaving him with a son he seldom mentioned. But with Catherine, he found new hope. Their romance blossomed quickly. Lunches at the factory cafe soon turned into intimate dinners, long walks, and whispered confessions of love. Rafał showered Catherine with gifts, devotion, and promises of a future together. Within months, he had met her family, who welcomed him with open arms. He was charming, trustworthy, and, most importantly, he made Catherine happy. Their relationship flourished. Catherine, a brilliant student, graduated with honors from Bath Spa University in 2011 and secured a prestigious job as a business analyst at Pneumatic International, the company behind the iconic Henry vacuum cleaners. Her intelligence, charisma, and work ethic propelled her career forward, earning her the admiration of her colleagues. She was kind, warm, and genuinely cared for those around her. With 2 stable incomes, the couple bought a beautiful home on Willow Way. Though financially secure, they opted for a mortgage, ensuring they were covered by insurance. Their future was bright: marriage, success, and happiness all within their grasp. But on September 12, 2012, everything changed. That day, a local resident named Orlando was driving when. To be continued. Orlando had spent the night working the graveyard shift at the gas station. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but he had made a promise to his wife: he would take their daughter, Maria, to kindergarten that morning. He hurried home, eager to keep his word, when something caught his attention. As he turned onto a quiet street, a thick column of black smoke curled into the sky from a nearby parking lot. His heart pounded as he approached the scene. A car was engulfed in flames, the fire crackling hungrily, sending waves of heat through the early morning air. Orlando pulled over, instinctively stepping forward, but the inferno was too intense. He had to stop. Helpless, he stood back, watching as the fire devoured everything in its path. The acrid smell of burning rubber and metal filled his lungs. Minutes later, firefighters arrived, but it was too late. The car was completely burned out. The police cordoned off the area, keeping onlookers at bay. It was eerily quiet. The early hour meant there were no witnesses, no one to explain what had happened or who had been inside. Then, they made a grisly discovery. Inside the charred remains of the vehicle lay a human body, burned beyond recognition. The police knew they had two immediate tasks: identify the victim and determine the cause of death. There were no skid marks, no evidence of another vehicle. Was it an accident? A case of self-ignition? Or something far more sinister? Investigators sent the remains to a forensic lab. They meticulously examined the vehicle's fragments, searching for mechanical failures or accelerants. Meanwhile, they combed through missing persons reports. One name stood out: 23-year-old Catherine Wells. Her boyfriend, Rafael Novak, had reported her missing just hours earlier. Rafael told police he had left for work at 5:30 a.m., leaving Catherine asleep in bed. When she failed to show up at work and wasn't at her parents' house, he began calling around frantically before finally reaching out to authorities. The police spoke to Catherine's family, her friends, and her colleagues, piecing together the final days of her life. What they uncovered painted a chilling picture. Rafael Novak, a 29-year-old Polish immigrant, had a past full of secrets. He had fled his home country, abandoning his wife and child to escape mounting debts. In the UK, he started a relationship with Anna Lavik in 2008. But when he met Catherine, he saw an opportunity, a stable, financially secure future. Unbeknownst to Catherine, Rafael was living a double life, stringing along both women until he finally chose her. But his choice wasn't driven by love. It was about money. Investigators discovered that Rafael had taken out a life insurance policy on Catherine. A hefty one. The payout? £123,000. And Catherine had a matching policy, with Rafael as the sole beneficiary. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the truth became. Rafael had no intention of spending his life with Catherine. He wanted to cash in on her death. The night before Catherine vanished, Rafael claimed everything had been normal. They had gone for a walk, bought groceries, had dinner, watched TV, and gone to bed together. But forensic evidence told a different story. Catherine had been strangled around 2 a.m., likely in her sleep. Her lifeless body had been placed in her car, driven a short distance, and set ablaze to erase the evidence. At first, Rafael's alibi seemed airtight. He had been at work by 5:30 a.m., and the burning car was discovered between 6 and 7 a.m. But security footage revealed something damning: he was still home at 1:30 a.m. As detectives closed in, Rafael spun a web of lies. He told them Catherine had a stalker, an unstable admirer who had been harassing her. But as they sifted through her digital footprint, investigators found something unexpected: Catherine had an anonymous presence on adult websites. She had been exchanging messages with various men, sharing intimate photos. And then, there was the letter. A mysterious note from an unnamed admirer. At first, it seemed like a bizarre subplot, but it was a carefully orchestrated deception. It was all part of Rafael's plan to mislead the investigation. And he hadn't worked alone. Police uncovered evidence linking Anna Lavik to the crime. She and her uncle, Tiberius Demetrin, had been seen on security cameras filling a gas can just days before the fire. Phone records showed that Anna and Rafael had been in constant communication, secretly meeting in the months leading up to Catherine's murder. Presented with undeniable evidence, Rafael and Anna turned on each other. He claimed Anna, driven by jealousy, had planned the entire thing. She accused him of masterminding the murder for the insurance money. But the truth was clear: this was a cold, calculated crime, months in the making. Rafal Novak, Anna Lavik, and Tiberius Demetrin were all arrested, charged with murder, arson, and conspiracy. The very life Rafal had tried to secure with Catherine's death would now be spent behind bars. Justice, though delayed, had finally caught up to them. The courtroom was silent as the judge looked upon Catherine Wellsberg's grieving parents, his voice heavy with sympathy. They had welcomed Rafal Novak into their home, treating him like family, only to discover, too late, that behind his charming facade lurked a cold-blooded monster. Rafal Novak's crime was not one of passion but of calculation, his actions fueled by financial greed rather than love. He had no real emotional ties to Catherine, just a deadly plan. The sheer brutality and premeditation of the crime shattered her parents. Jane Wellsberg, her mother, tearfully testified that the horror of her daughter's final moments would haunt them for the rest of their lives. She regretted never getting the chance to say goodbye, never having the opportunity to tell her daughter just how much she loved her. Her pain turned to fury as she declared that Rafal was nothing short of evil and that he deserved to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Philip Wellsberg, Catherine's father, added that they had once trusted Rafal. He had been more than just Catherine's boyfriend, they had embraced him as a son. That trust had been repaid with betrayal. The betrayal cut even deeper when details emerged during the trial. Rafal, standing in the witness box, had the audacity to deny any involvement in Catherine's murder. He tried to paint himself as a victim, claiming that everyone was unfairly blaming him. But the court heard a chilling contradiction. When the police discovered Catherine's burned-out car on September 12 of the previous year, Rafal had shown no emotion. Not a single tear. Not an ounce of remorse. The most damning revelation came from Jane's own testimony. She recounted how, after Rafal's initial release from police custody, he had gone out to celebrate with a steak dinner. He didn't even mention Catherine. That was the moment Jane knew. Her daughter's fate had been sealed the moment she and Rafal had signed a life insurance policy together. In doing so, Catherine had unknowingly signed her own death warrant. The trial's conclusion was inevitable. The jury found Rafal Novak guilty of murdering Catherine by suffocating her with a pillow while she slept. But he hadn't acted alone. His secret lover, Anna Lennox, and her uncle, Tadeusz, had conspired with him to collect a life insurance payout of £123,000 and claim their share of Catherine's house. Anna and Tadeusz had transported Catherine's lifeless body, placed it in her car, and set it ablaze in a remote area in a desperate attempt to cover their tracks. Justice was served, at least on paper. Rafal and Anna were sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 32 years before they would even be considered for parole. Tadeusz received 27 years. But no amount of prison time could bring Catherine back. The tragedy did more than devastate her family, it tore them apart. Philip and Jane Wellsberg, overwhelmed by grief and the weight of their loss, eventually divorced. Their sorrow turned into a campaign for stricter immigration laws. If the UK had more stringent policies, they argued, Rafal Novak, who had a history of domestic violence back in Poland, would never have been allowed into the country. Jane, who had been unaware of his past, voiced her frustration with the government's failure to properly vet those entering the UK. Yet, despite their anger, their greatest sorrow remained the loss of their daughter. Catherine had been more than just a victim, she had been a bright, determined, hard-working woman who had earned a first-class degree from Bath Spa University. She had a future, one filled with promise and ambition. Now, that future was nothing more than ashes. Her family, devastated and lost, could only hold on to memories of the young woman they were so proud of. They struggled to imagine life without her. What should have been a life filled with success, love, and happiness had been cruelly stolen, leaving behind nothing but grief and unanswered questions. And so, the name Catherine Wellsberg would forever be etched in their hearts, a reminder of the horrors hidden behind deceptive smiles and the high price of misplaced trust. The courtroom was heavy with sorrow as the judge addressed the grieving parents of Catherine Wellsberg. With deep sympathy, he acknowledged the unimaginable pain they endured, betrayed by a man they once welcomed into their home. To the world, Rafal Novak was charming, charismatic, and seemingly devoted to Catherine. But behind his facade lurked a ruthless predator, driven by greed and devoid of any real affection for the woman he claimed to love. Catherine's mother, Jane Wellsberg, fought back tears as she spoke. The brutal and calculated manner in which her daughter's life was taken would haunt her forever. What devastated her most was the stolen opportunity to say goodbye, to hold Catherine one last time, to remind her how much she was loved. Her voice trembled as she described Rafal as nothing short of evil, a man undeserving of freedom, a man who should spend the rest of his life locked away. Her father, Philip Wellsberg, shared his own anguish. He and Jane had once embraced Rafal as family, treating him like a son. They had trusted him, welcomed him to their dinner table, and never imagined the betrayal that would unfold. But Rafal repaid their kindness with deception and murder. Throughout the trial, Rafal maintained his innocence. Taking the witness stand, his voice wavered, but his words lacked the sincerity of a grieving boyfriend. He insisted that he was being blamed for a crime he did not commit. Yet, when the police discovered Catherine's body in her burned-out car on September 12 last year, he showed no emotion. No tears. No shock. Just eerie detachment. Jane Wellsberg recalled with horror how, after his initial release from police custody, Rafal's first request was for a steak dinner. He did not ask about Catherine. He did not weep. He simply wanted to eat. The prosecution painted a chilling picture. Catherine had unknowingly sealed her fate when she and Rafal purchased a home together and signed a life insurance policy. To Jane, that document was more than a contract, it was her daughter's death warrant, signed in ink but destined to be paid in blood. The court found Rafal Novak guilty of a cold-blooded, premeditated murder. As Catherine slept, he smothered her with a pillow, ensuring she would never wake up. But he had not acted alone. He had conspired with his secret lover, Anna Lennox, and her uncle, Tefs, in a sinister plan to claim a £123,000 life insurance payout and a share of the house. In a final, despicable act, Anna and Tefs transported Catherine's lifeless body in her car to a remote location, doused it in gasoline, and set it ablaze, hoping to erase all traces of their crime. Justice was served. Rafal and Anna were sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 32 years, while Tefs received a 27-year sentence. But for Catherine's parents, no prison sentence could undo their pain. The damage was irreversible. In the wake of their daughter's murder, Philip and Jane Wellsberg became vocal advocates for stricter immigration laws. They firmly believed that if the UK had implemented more rigorous background checks, Rafal Novak, who had a history of domestic violence in Poland, would never have been allowed into the country. The revelation of his past crimes only deepened their heartbreak. How many other lives could be at risk from unchecked individuals slipping through the system? Jane spoke candidly about the government's failure to prevent such tragedies. She had no idea about Rafal's violent past, and she couldn't help but wonder, had the system worked the way it should have, would Catherine still be alive? Despite their calls for reform, no policy change could bring their daughter back. Catherine Wellsberg was more than a victim. She was a bright, determined, and hard-working young woman, a first-class graduate of Bath Spa University with limitless potential. Her family had envisioned a future filled with love, success, and happiness for her. Instead, they were left with an unfillable void, a wound that would never heal. Their grief was immeasurable. Their loss, unbearable. And as they tried to move forward, one painful truth remained: Catherine had been robbed of her future, her dreams reduced to ashes, her promising life cruelly stolen by those she had once trusted. The nightmare began with an act of care and devotion. A dedicated nursing assistant, determined to finish her studies, took it upon herself to care for little Sophie. But as time passed, tensions grew, fueled by secrets, doubts, and an escalating custody battle that would soon spiral into an unimaginable horror. Hannah's life took another unexpected turn when she became pregnant again. Although she adamantly insisted that Jake was not the father, doubt festered in Jake's mind. Desperate to uncover the truth, he did the unthinkable. In December 2015, he hacked into Hannah's social media accounts. But instead of discovering an affair, he found nothing. Frustrated and still suspicious, he shared his findings with his family. Their rage only deepened. One text message, sent in a moment of defiance, would prove to be a haunting premonition. Hannah, exhausted from the relentless battle, declared that the Wagner family would have to get rid of her before they could take Sophie away. Those words would become a chilling prophecy. Jake's grandmother, Rita Newcomb, 65, took matters into her own hands. She forged an important custody-related document, believing it would give their family an upper hand in the ongoing legal war. But the court battle only fueled the already volatile tensions between the two families. During a heated confrontation, Christopher Roden and George Wagner III clashed violently. The argument left an irreparable rift between the two families, one that would soon lead to a monstrous decision. As the holidays approached, a time meant for warmth and celebration, the Wagner family gathered. But instead of exchanging gifts and love, they held a secret meeting, a meeting with one unthinkable agenda: murder. The Wagners saw Hannah as an unyielding obstacle, and in their minds, the only solution was to erase the Roden family from existence. It was a decision that would haunt the small community of Pike County, Ohio, forever. In the months leading up to the massacre, the Wagner family meticulously crafted their plan. They studied their targets, mapping out their daily routines, surveilling their homes, and analyzing their movements with chilling precision. Each family member had a role in the twisted scheme. Angela Wagner purchased a communication blocking device, intended to prevent the Rodens from calling for help. George Wagner III offered his expertise in crafting a homemade silencer. Every detail was calculated, ensuring nothing would go wrong. The night of the attack, little Sophie was safe in the Wagner home, shielded from the horror that was about to unfold. April 22, 2016. A day that would forever be etched in blood. At approximately 8 a.m., George Wagner III arrived at Christopher Roden's home, using the guise of a promising job opportunity. The offer was nothing but a trap. As Christopher greeted him at the door, the nightmare began. Moments later, the Roden household fell silent, except for the muffled echoes of gunfire. Bobby Jo Manley, a trusted caretaker for the Roden family's animals, arrived as she did every morning. But something was off. The house, usually empty during the early hours, had an unsettling presence. As she cautiously stepped inside, her worst fears became reality. There, lying in pools of blood, were Christopher and his cousin Gary, 38. Their lifeless bodies painted a horrifying scene of brutality. Panicked, Bobby grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her voice shaking as she recounted the horror she had just stumbled upon. But it wasn't over. Driven by instinct, she rushed to the homes of other Roden family members, knocking frantically. A small child, a 3-year-old boy, the son of Clarence, Frankie, Roden, peeked out from inside one of the homes. When she asked where his parents were, the boy didn't answer. He simply pointed toward the bedroom. Bobby stepped inside and froze. There, in their bed, lay Clarence and his wife, Hannah Hazel, motionless. Their 6-month-old baby lay between them, miraculously alive but drenched in their blood. With Bobby's desperate call for help, authorities swarmed the area. A concerned neighbor urged officers to check other Roden residences. His instincts were right. The bodies continued to be discovered: Dana Roden, 19-year-old Hannah Mae, 16-year-old Christopher Jr. The carnage stretched beyond a single home. The violence had torn through multiple households. The killers had left no room for error, no survivors, except for the young children who had been spared, including a 4-day-old newborn. By 2 p.m., the full extent of the massacre became clear. 8 members of the Roden family had been executed in cold blood: Christopher Sr., Dana, Clarence, Hannah Hazel, Christopher Jr., Hannah Mae, Kenneth, and Gary. The method was chillingly precise: gunshots to the head, ensuring immediate, merciless death. Forensic experts pieced together the tragic final moments. Christopher Sr. had fought back, evidenced by the bullet wound in his right arm. But it was a futile effort. He had been shot 9 times, his body riddled with bullets in a brutal execution. Dana Roden's body bore 5 gunshot wounds to her neck and head. The rest of the victims met similar fates. Gary was shot 5 times, Christopher Jr. 4, Clarence and Hannah Hazel 3 each, Hannah Mae twice, and Kenneth, the only victim to be shot once. A total of 32 bullets had been fired, some even after the victims had died. Some bodies showed signs of physical trauma, suggesting the victims had suffered before their deaths. Yet, despite the brutality, no neighbors reported hearing a sound. The murderers had used silencers, a chilling testament to the calculated nature of the crime. It was not a crime of passion, nor a random act of violence. It was a deliberate, premeditated execution of an entire bloodline. The evidence told a story of cold, remorseless revenge. Scattered among the wreckage, detectives discovered 5 Remington shell casings, an unused bullet, and traces of different firearm models. This was not a single perpetrator's crime. This was an operation, carried out with military precision and an unspeakable motive. Pike County had never witnessed anything like it. A family, obliterated in their sleep. A legacy wiped out in a single night. And behind it all, a family willing to do anything, kill anyone, to claim one little girl as their own. The bloodshed of April 22 was only the beginning. Now, the hunt for justice had begun. The case surrounding the Roden family massacre in Pike County unfolded like something from the darkest of crime thrillers, where the chilling details only seemed to grow more tangled with each passing day. On the surface, it was a brutal, calculated murder that seemed impossible to solve, but the deeper the investigation went, the more shocking and complicated the story became. The Roden family was found murdered in their homes in the small town of Pike County, Ohio. The crime was so heinous that it left the entire state in shock. Leonard Manley, Dana's father, offered a chilling theory that the perpetrators must have known the family well. After all, the dogs had not barked, a crucial detail that suggested the killers were familiar faces. The investigation quickly turned into a race against time, and the Attorney General's office made a rare move, offering over $20,000 to assist with the Roden family's funeral costs. The funerals took place in stages throughout the spring of 2016. Gary Roden was the first to be laid to rest on April 28 in South Shore, Kentucky, followed by Hannah Hazel on May 1 in the village of Atway, Ohio. The rest of the family was buried on May 3 in West Portsmouth, Ohio, with hundreds of locals attending the somber services. The remaining children were taken into the care of relatives, and the neighborhood was gripped by fear. Police warned residents to take precautions, urging them to stay indoors at night, as it was clear that someone, or perhaps more than one person, was still at large, capable of such horror. The investigation into the murders left law enforcement baffled. The 3 homes where the family lived were meticulously searched, as were several vehicles. Forensic experts scoured every inch of the crime scenes, but the killers had left almost no trace behind. Despite cameras being installed in the homes, they failed to provide any useful evidence. Someone had disabled them, a move that suggested a carefully planned execution. But even in a case where everything seemed calculated, there was a breakthrough: the discovery of marijuana plants at all 3 crime scenes. Around 200 plants were found in one location, and it was suspected that the cannabis had been grown for sale. This led investigators to theorize that Mexican drug cartels might be involved. Yet, the amount of marijuana found was not enough to suggest such a large-scale operation. As the investigation stretched on, another twist emerged. In January 2017, a close relative of the Roden family was arrested for drug trafficking, which seemed like a coincidence at first. Leonard Manley quickly stated that his daughter Dana had no involvement with the marijuana operation, though some family members admitted that two of the older brothers, Christopher and Kenneth Roden, had grown cannabis but were unaware of any large-scale cultivation. To add to the mystery, evidence of illegal chicken fighting was found at the Roden home, but it quickly became clear that this wasn't the motive for the murders either. Months passed without significant leads, and by April 2017, local authorities were forced to admit that they lacked the evidence necessary to make any arrests. Prosecutor Rob Yum suggested the investigation was ongoing, but the community began to lose faith, especially as the second memorial service for the Roden family passed quietly, with no media coverage or law enforcement attendance. Then, on May 12, 2017, a surprise raid took place in Pike County. Special weapons and tactics teams swarmed a home about 10 miles from the crime scene, initially searching for suspects but later gathering evidence. A few days later, another search took place at a house in Adams County, once owned by Jake Wagner, one of the key players in the investigation. It was then that the focus began to shift to the Wagner family, Jake, his brother George, and their parents, Angela and George Wagner III. The Wagners lived approximately 15 miles from the Rodens, and had moved to Alaska, claiming they were trying to escape the intense investigation. They had expressed sorrow over the Roden deaths, but investigators were beginning to connect the dots between the Wagner family and the murders. In June 2017, authorities made it clear that they were now seeking public information about the Wagner family's activities, particularly concerning firearms, ammunition, vehicles, and other related matters. The investigation had taken a dramatic turn. By November 13, 2018, the Wagner family and their sons were arrested and charged with orchestrating and executing the murders of the Roden family. Rita Newcomb, Angela Wagner's 65-year-old mother, was also arrested for perjury and obstruction of justice. By 2019, Rita had struck a plea deal after undergoing handwriting analysis to confirm her role in forging guardianship documents for Sophie, the young daughter of Jake and Hannah Mae Roden. Rita's deal led to the charges against Fred Wagner being dropped. But in a shocking development, Jake Wagner agreed to a plea deal in 2021, revealing his role in the murders in exchange for life sentences for himself and his family. He admitted to killing 5 of the 8 victims and faced 23 criminal charges, including felonies for theft, conspiracy, illegal possession of ammunition, and obstruction of justice. Jake's explanation for the murders was chilling. He believed killing the entire Roden family was the only way to ensure he would gain full custody of his daughter, Sophie. He feared that if he didn't wipe out the family, they would seek revenge and block his custody request. The trial continued as Angela Wagner faced charges for conspiracy, aggravated robbery, and tampering with evidence. She eventually pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against her family members, unraveling the entire sinister plot. What seemed at first to be an incomprehensible mass murder slowly revealed itself to be a carefully orchestrated plan by a family determined to protect their own interests, no matter the cost. The investigation, which had seemed to stall, ultimately led to the capture and conviction of those responsible, but the chilling nature of the crime left a permanent scar on the community and the Roden family's surviving members.